The flood hit the canyon floor at 3:40, and I heard it before I saw it, that low grinding sound like the whole mountain clearing its throat. Then the wall of brown water coming through the gorge with everything it had collected on the way down from the headwaters. Root mats, equipment crates from whoever lost the battle upstream, broken supply line housings, and one person, turning in the outer current about 30 meters from the south face. I was already in my boots by the time the sound registered fully. 22 years of canyon work teaches you to move first and process later. I grabbed the throw line off the dock hook, 120 meters of compact grade 12, rated to 800 kilograms, which is more than enough for one person even with water resistance. Clipped the working end to the iron ring set into the depot shelf wall, and went in at the downstream edge where the basalt fin breaks the main current. The water was cold enough to take the breath out of you in the first second. This is normal for canyon flood water in the headwater-fed gorges, snowmelt from 3,000 meters above combines, with whatever the storm has pushed through the secondary tributaries, and the result is water that is working very hard at a very low temperature. I know what cold water does to a person's coordination, and I know how to move through it anyway, which is something you either learn or you don't. And I learned it in my first year on the Kethorvath SAR unit when I was 21 years old and had no idea what I was getting into. The person in the current was not going to make another bend. I could see that from the way they were moving, not fighting the water, which is correct instinct, but not directing themselves either, which meant they were past the point where instinct is enough. I reached them just before the debris field thinned at the south ledge and got my arm across their chest the way you do it, the way that lets you work with the water instead of against it, and walked us both sideways out of the main pool. They went still the moment I had them. That was the first thing I registered about this person, even before I registered anything else. Most people in flood water fight the rescuer at some level, even when they're trying not to. It's the panic instinct converting itself into whatever motion is available. This person went completely still and let me work, which is something you mostly see in people who have enough training or enough trust to override the instinct, or people who have made a decision. I got us to the south ledge, then up the carved steps that the original canyon survey teams had cut into the basalt 80 years ago. 4 meters of wet handheld climbing with one arm occupied, which I have done before and do not recommend but have never died from. The steps are narrow and the basalt is slick when wet, and you have to know exactly where your feet are going. I know where they are going. By the time I had them over the depot threshold and into the main supply room, they were shaking with the deep, involuntary shiver that means the body has been borrowing heat from places it would prefer not to borrow from. I have seen that particular shiver before, and I know exactly how long it takes to stop and what stops it. I put them in the back room. The back room of a Kethorvath Canyon Way Station 7 depot is not a medical facility or a comfort establishment. It is a 12 square meter space with a ventilation stack from the generator running through the interior wall, which keeps the temperature about 6 degrees warmer than the main supply room, and a sleep platform and a storage cabinet, and a heating coil that I maintain correctly because in canyon country, a heating coil that fails in winter is a problem worth taking seriously. I had a wool underlayer on the supply shelf because I keep spare kit at operational readiness, which my former SAR unit commander would have considered the minimum acceptable standard, and I consider basic sense. I stripped the outer jacket because it was saturated and functioning as insulation in the wrong direction. Got the wool underlayer on them. Then I looked at the left shoulder, which was sitting at an angle that shoulders are not supposed to sit at. "This is dislocated," I said. The person looked at me. I was looking at them for the first time without several meters of fast water between us. Gold ivory skin, not human clearly, with the slight luminosity under the surface that Velsorn people have in certain lights, dark reddish wine hair plastered flat against the skull, and eyes a pale teal color that the emergency lamp made look almost silver. Young, or younger than me. currently running the controlled breathing pattern of someone managing pain with deliberate technique. I know, she said. Her compact standard was precise and formal, the cadence of someone who had learned it as a studied language rather than a lived one. I can reduce it now or wait for the rotation transit medic. Medic rotation is 6 days out. She appeared to consider this with more composure than most people produce with a dislocated shoulder at 350 in a canyon flood aftermath. Now, please. It will hurt. Most things worth doing do. I reduced the shoulder on a 2 count, which is the correct method for an anterior dislocation. Warning before the count, so the patient can brace, then moving on 2 so the instinctive flinch doesn't compound the contact. She made a sound that was controlled and brief and precisely as long as it needed to be, and then her shoulder was back in its socket, and I was putting the arm in a sling fashioned from the depot's utility strapping. Keep it immobile for at least 3 days, I said. The rotation medic can image it when they come through and tell you if anything else needs attention. Thank you, she said it quietly and plainly, the way people say things when they mean them without performance. I got her water. I got her 2 emergency ration bars from the supply cabinet, because I had looked at her while I was carrying her and could see she had not eaten a full meal recently, not starvation, but the kind of caloric deficit that builds when a person has been managing logistics across a hard transit corridor and not stopping for meals because stopping seemed less important than covering ground. She took both bars without comment and ate them with systematic efficiency. I left her with the heating coil on high and went back to the dock to assess flood damage. This is the work. The flood has happened or it has not, and you cannot unflood a canyon, so once the immediate human situation is addressed, the next correct thing is understanding what you are working with. Debris assessment, structure check, supply inventory, communication array status. I do these in the same order every time because in canyon country, the order matters and an improvised sequence in an emergency is where errors get made. The depot exterior had taken debris impact on the east panel's surface scoring, no structural compromise. 1 mooring line was gone, which meant replacing it from the supply stock before the next delivery transit arrived. The antenna array was intact, which was the most important element, because that was how I would reach the next way station and file the incident report that the compact administrative system requires within 6 hours of any rescue event on this corridor. I logged the damage, filed the incident report, and made myself a mug of ground seed concentrate. The sun was coming up over the east rim of the gorge by the time I filed, which meant the canyon walls were doing the thing they do in early light, going from gray to amber in a gradient that starts at the top and works down as the light descends into the gorge. I have watched this happen for 7 years from the depot dock, and I still watch it every time. Then I made a second mug and brought it to the back room. She was sitting up. The shaking had decreased substantially. She had the wool underlayer pulled close and the heating coil was doing its work. Thank you, she said again, taking the mug. Where were you headed? Thresholvath 4. Agricultural Logistics Assessment. Your skiff. Lost at the 3rd bend. A pause. I had a transit map. I thought I could walk the canyon floor to the next way station. In flash season. She met my eyes steadily over the mug. I was not aware it was flash season. It is posted at the entry corridor of every way station along this route. I did not come through a way station. I transited direct from the Velsorn administrative relay to the lower canyon access point. She appeared to acknowledge, without particular defensiveness, that this had been an error in planning. The map I had was not current for the seasonal conditions. Rotation transit is 6 days. You can have the back room. I'll move my kit to the dock storage. She started to object, and I held up a hand. You need warmth and rest. The dock storage is insulated. I've slept in worse. I believe you, she said, which was the right response, and one that she delivered without the particular quality of polite resistance that people use when they actually want to keep arguing. "What is your name?" "Joram Dale. I operate this way station. Before that, I ran the Canyon SAR unit for 15 years. "Joram," she said, testing the syllables. "I am Keithra." "All right, drink the concentrate while it's warm." She did. The following morning, I was in the supply room running the post-flood inventory assessment when she came out of the back room at mid-morning. Her hair was dry and pulled back with the cord from the utility strapping. She had the depot work jacket on. I had left a spare one on the chair outside the back room because the air was still cold, and her outer layer was damp and hanging on the dock hook. She moved carefully with the slung arm, but not the way someone moves when pain is their primary project for the day. More the way someone moves when they have decided that the pain is information rather than a problem. She stood in the doorway of the supply room and looked at the shelving arrays, the inventory terminal, the manifest printouts pinned to the tracking board, and the handwritten reconciliation log hanging on its hook beside the terminal. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Post-flood stock assessment." The supply rotation that was due through this morning got pushed 2 days out by the flood events upstream. I need to know what I'm working with against the probable demand window from the survey teams. She came into the room. I noted that she did this without asking permission, which I took as a sign that she was either naturally direct or had assessed the situation, and concluded that the depot operator was not going to object to her using the space. Both of these would have been correct assessments. "May I help?" I looked at the slung arm. "You have one functional hand." "I can read numbers with one hand." This was reasonable. I gave her the current shelf count printout. "Cross-check that against the manifest on the board. Tell me where the discrepancies are." She did this with the focused attention of someone who was professionally accustomed to working with supply data. She was not pretending to help. She was actually doing the work, running her finger down the shelf count columns and comparing them to the manifest entries with a systematic efficiency that told me she had done this kind of audit before. She found 3 discrepancies. 2 of them were mine, recording errors from the previous weeks, count that I had been planning to correct in the next manual reconciliation cycle. The third was a depot system error that had been logging the same case of rope hardware as both delivered and undelivered for 11 days, creating a phantom entry that would eventually cause a supply order duplication. "This one has been wrong for some time," she said, pointing at the rope hardware entry. "I know. I've flagged it to the depot system maintenance office. They'll correct it in the next cycle." "When is the next maintenance cycle?" 4 months. She absorbed this. "How do you manage the operational variance in the interim?" "Separate handwritten log, manual reconciliation every 2 weeks. I nodded at the log on the hook. "The system discrepancies get their own column." She looked at the log for a moment longer than a quick glance requires. "The handwriting is neat because I was trained by an SAR commander who considered illegible field logs a safety risk. And the column system is something I developed in my 2nd year of running the depot when I got tired of the system errors compounding." "This is very thorough," she said, in the tone of someone stating an observation rather than offering a compliment. "It's the job," I said. "You want more concentrate." She did. We established over the following days a routine that I did not plan and she did not appear to object to. She helped with the supply work in the mornings, using the one good arm and her eye for numerical detail to a degree of usefulness that a depot operator on a 6-day rotation cycle genuinely appreciated. She asked questions about the canyon, the terrain, the seasonal patterns, the survey team contracts, the specific technical problems of running a resupply operation in a gorge that floods irregularly and has limited transit access. The questions were good ones, meaning they were specific and they indicated she was actually listening to the answers and building on them rather than collecting them. On the afternoon of the second day, Survey Team 4's lead cartographer came through the depot for a scheduled calibration, consumables pickup, and found Keithra at the inventory terminal doing the manifest cross-check for the afternoon supply. He looked at her, looked at me, looked at the sling, and said nothing about any of it, which is the Canyon protocol for situations where someone is working and asking questions about what they're doing would be a distraction. He signed for his calibration stock and was about to leave when Keithra said, "Your last 3 flux indicator pickups have been at different intervals. The stock replacement schedule on the manifest has you on a fixed 14-day cycle, but you're running 8, 10, and 11 days respectively." The cartographer stopped, looked at her again. "Equipment's running hot," he said. "We're doing double-shift scanning on the fault line formation. The flux indicator burn rate at double shift would suggest you need approximately 40% more stock per cycle," she said. "I can file a cycle adjustment with the depot supply coordinator now, or you can wait for the next standard review." He looked at me. "She found the rope hardware error too," I said. He filed the cycle adjustment before he left. The survey team's next supply order came in correctly calibrated for the first time in 6 months. In the evenings, she stood at the canyon wall viewport and watched the light change on the basalt. She did this quietly, without making it a production, and I left her to it because there is nothing wrong with a person wanting to watch the light change on canyon rock. It is one of the better uses of an evening, I know. I did not ask her why she had been traveling without a current seasonal map. I did not press her on the agricultural logistics assessment she had mentioned once and then not raised again. People who come through canyon country are carrying their own reasons, and those reasons are their own until they decide otherwise. My work is the canyon, the supply stock, and the safety of the corridor. On the evening of the third day, she told me. I had made a pot of soup from the reconstituted vegetable stock and the Velcareth grain fiber packets that Survey Team 3 consistently underorders, and then asks me to supplement from depot stock on an emergency basis. It is a reasonable soup. We were sitting at the supply room table, which is the only table the depot has, and the viewport was showing the canyon wall in its early evening amber color, and she said, "There is something I should have told you sooner." "All right." "The law," she said, "Velsorn Frontier Law specifically, Section 14 of the Outer Margin Protective Codes, the Preservation Bond Statute." I put down my spoon. "It is an old law," she said, 400 years old, written for frontier canyon territory very much like this, when Velsorn exploration parties were losing people in flood events, and the local guides who retrieved them were being compensated with nothing. She spoke with measured precision, as if she had rehearsed this and was still finding it difficult. The law provides that any non-Velsorn individual who retrieves a Velsorn citizen of the sovereignty's hereditary line from a life-threatening situation, the specific language is a situation from which the citizen would not have survived without the intervention, is bound to that citizen as a protector mate under Velsorn Compact Law. The bond holds unless the citizen formally releases it within 30 days. I was looking at her. "I am," she said, "of the sovereignty's hereditary line." I had been reassessing this likelihood for 2 days, quietly, in the part of the mind that keeps accounting going in the background, while other things occupy the foreground. The formal standard cadence, the way she had assessed the supply discrepancy log with professional accuracy, the way she had gone still in the flood water with the deliberate composure of someone trained to manage extreme situations, the way she looked at the canyon maps. "Third line air," she said. "Velsorn Keithra Orvath. I was traveling under the agricultural logistics credential because I do that work genuinely. It is a real posting, but I am also the Orvath sovereignty's third heir, and the preservation bond law activated the moment you pulled me out of the current. I was quiet for a moment. Am I reading this correctly? I said. The law considers us bonded. Immediately and in full, yes. She held my gaze steadily. I should have told you the first day. I was trying to determine how to explain it without sounding as though I was making a formal claim on you, or alternatively dismissing what you did as something the law had simply captured and categorized without your consent. Both of those things seemed wrong. Is there a release process? Yes. Standard procedure for an unexpected activation is a sovereignty advisor arrives, administers the release documentation, and both parties sign. You would receive compensation under the outer margin service provision, which is substantial. How substantial? She named a figure. I looked at the viewport. The canyon wall was going from amber toward the reddish tone it holds in the last 20 minutes before dark. When did you notify the advisor? When I first reached your transit array. He will arrive in 2 days. His name? Velthar Sarath, Third Court Advisor. He will have all the documentation. All right, I said. She looked at me with the careful attention she had been applying to everything in this depot. You are managing this very calmly. I'm trying to work out what there is to be uncalm about. I pulled someone out of the flood. The law took notice. Now we'll handle the paperwork. Most people, she said, when they learn the other party is a sovereignty heir, begin to calculate what the bond's continuation might offer them. They change how they speak. They change how they look at me. I thought about this. I'm not going to look at you differently, I said. You're the person who found the rope hardware error. She was quiet for 3 full seconds. I would like more soup, she said. I gave her more soup. The next 2 days she helped with the incoming supply rotation when it arrived on the second afternoon. One good arm, but a competent eye for the manifest and a working knowledge of how freight weights should distribute in a canyon access depot where everything has to travel down a restricted access path. She knew how to read a supply transfer record, and she knew how to identify the items that get priority placement for access frequency, which is a logistical instinct not everyone has. When I told her the calibration consumables for the survey teams went on the 3rd shelf from the right because those were the ones that got pulled on a hard deadline, she understood immediately and placed them correctly without discussion. She helped me stake a new mooring line at the south dock end. This was slightly awkward one-handed, but she managed it by using the shelf bracket as a brace, and I handed her the components in the correct sequence. We worked the canyon survey map in the evenings. I showed her the basin formations, the secondary channels, the seasonal flow patterns that determine which farming zones are accessible during which months. She asked questions that got progressively more specific as the days went on, which meant she was building a mental model rather than accumulating isolated facts. By the second evening, she was asking about the relationship between the upstream snowmelt schedule and the lower basin planting calendar, which is a question that takes most agricultural logistics assessors 3 site visits to arrive at. You actually do this work, I said, not a question. I have been doing it for 4 years, she said. The lower outer margin zones are consistently under-resourced in their supply chain coordination. My office has been working on a restructuring proposal for the past 18 months. She was looking at the map. The Third Bend Basin has the best soil index in the lower canyon system, but the flood risk means no one will invest in infrastructure there. If the seasonal patterns could be better predicted. I have 15 years of flood event logs, I said. She turned to look at me. SAR unit kept comprehensive records, every flood event, time-stamped, with upstream condition notation and flow measurements at each key point. I went to the depot terminal and pulled up the archive. Nobody's done a formal analysis. I tried to get the Compact Agricultural Coordination Office interested in it 4 years ago. They said it was outside their scope. She looked at the archive index for a long time. "May I work with these?" she said. "Yes," I said. "That's what they're there for." We spent the second evening going through 15 years of canyon flood event data together, which is not how I had expected to spend the time before the sovereignty advisor arrived, but which turned out to be the most useful work either of us had done in a while. Velthar Sarath came on the fifth afternoon in a sovereignty carrier that was 3 times larger than anything the canyon corridor usually accommodates, and which had to settle on the flat above the depot shelf because the access path couldn't take anything with a larger landing footprint. 2 sovereignty guards came down first. Then the advisor, tall, formal, copper-gray skin, dark eyes, the measured competence of someone who had administered this specific procedure several times before and found it straightforward. He looked at the depot with a categorizing expression, and then looked at me the same way. "Joram Dale, operator of Kethorveth Canyon Way Station 7. "That's right." He set his data folio on the supply table and produced the documentation with practiced efficiency. "I am Velthar Sarath, Third Court Advisor to the Orvath Sovereignty. I am here to administer the release of the preservation bond activated on the 15th of this month at approximately 3:40 under Section 14 of the Outer Margin Protective Codes. Both parties sign the release form. You receive the outer margin service compensation. The bond is dissolved. 20 minutes, perhaps less." "Where is the princess?" he added. "Back room. If she could join us." I went to the back room. Keithra was standing at the narrow viewport facing the canyon wall. She was wearing the depot work jacket still. The sovereignty carrier had certainly brought her appropriate clothing, and she had not changed into any of it. She turned when I opened the door. "He's ready," I said. "I know." She was steady and quiet. "You don't have to do anything today that you haven't decided to do." She looked at me. The teal eyes in the afternoon light had the quality of the canyon pools in the lower basin, clear all the way to the bottom, but the bottom is further than it looks. "I know that too, Joram." She said my name with the particular care she had been using since the first night. "What do you want?" I have done enough canyon work to know that the right answer to any question asked in the field is the honest one, because the ones that go wrong are almost always the ones where somebody said what seemed situationally correct rather than what was actually true. "I want what I've wanted since 3:40 on the 15th, I said, "for you to be all right, whatever form that takes. And if the form it takes involves staying." "Then that's what I want," I said. "If it's what you want." She looked at the canyon wall for a moment, the amber going dark on the basalt, the narrow strip of sky above the gorge rim, the river sound from below. Then she turned back to me. "Come with me," she said. We went out to the supply room together. The advisor had the release documentation open on the folio. He looked up when we came in, and a very slight recalibration happened in his expression. The expression of a professional who has just observed something that does not quite match his pre-arrival assessment of the situation. Keithra stood at the table. She did not sit. She looked at the documentation for one moment, and then she looked at Velthar Sarath with the formal composure of someone who has been trained since childhood for exactly this kind of room. "Before you administer the release," she said, "I am invoking the acceptance clause under Section 14, subsection 8 of the Outer Margin Protective Codes." The advisor's expression went still. "Your Highness, I am aware of the procedural requirements." Her voice was steady and unhurried. "I am also aware that the acceptance clause exists specifically because the law's writers understood that some bonds activated under frontier conditions are worth keeping, and they did not want the procedure to require the bonded individual to argue against their own preference to a court bureaucracy. I am not releasing the bond. I am accepting it formally before witnesses under the clause that allows exactly this." Velthar Sarath was quiet for a moment in the way of someone choosing their words carefully. This is a significant decision, Your Highness. The acceptance clause is irreversible under subsection 12 of the same section. Yes, I have read the statute. A pause. All of it, including the implementation notes from the original drafting committee. She turned to look at me, and something in her face that had been carefully arranged settled into something simpler. Joram Dale, Compact Frontier Depot Operator and Canyon Search and Rescue Coordinator, 22 years of service in the Kethorvath Canyon System, Way Station 7. She said my name and my work, and my station in the formal register the law requires for an acceptance clause invocation. The guards on the access path were visible through the viewport. The law required 2 witnesses of Velsorn standing, and they were what was available. By the Preservation Bond Statute of the Orvath Sovereignty, Section 14, and the acceptance clause thereof, she said, I affirm this bond willingly and without reservation. I name this man not as an instrument of rescue, but as someone I choose to have the law see clearly, and I accept all provisions of the bond under the full compact. The room was quiet. Velthar Sarath was quiet for 2 full seconds. Then he said, with the control of a professional who has just encountered an unexpected outcome and is processing it correctly, "This is your formal invocation on the record." On the record, she said, "Yes." Then I am required to record it. He pulled the release documentation back and made entries in the folio with the efficiency of someone who has updated their understanding of the situation and is proceeding accordingly. The release documentation is superseded. The acceptance is formally recorded. I require the acknowledgement from Joram Dale. I looked at Kithra. She looked at me. The teal eyes had the bottom further than it looks quality, and the afternoon light was doing its thing on her skin, and I thought about 15 years of flood event logs that nobody had looked at, and the rope hardware error on the 3rd sheet of the 3rd column, and the way she had gone still in the flood current. I acknowledge the acceptance, I said, freely and without reservation. He recorded it. The guards on the path witnessed from the door. The folio was closed. The documentation was submitted to the sovereignty record through the depot transit array, which I had maintained correctly for 7 years against the day when it might matter. The advisor and the guards went back up to the carrier, because there is not a great deal of comfortable space in a canyon floor depot, and Velthar Sarath was professional enough to know when a room needed fewer people in it. I heard the carrier's access ramp close. I heard the engine cycle. That means a sovereignty vessel is preparing to lift. I made tea. The depot's tea is a rough, compact-grade leaf that I received through the survey team supply chain, because no one has seen fit to improve the depot allotment in the 7 years I have been running this way station. It is adequate tea and it is hot, which are its 2 primary qualifications. I put 2 mugs on the supply room table and sat down across from Kithra. She sat with the ease of someone who has made a decision and is no longer spending energy on the question of whether to make it. He's going to have a report to file, I said. He will file it correctly, she said. Velthar is very precise. She wrapped both hands around the mug, the slung arm careful but easier than it had been. The first 3 weeks will be administrative. My court is very good at administrative. Are you? She looked at me over the mug. I found the rope hardware error on the 3rd sheet, she said. Yes, you did. That answers your question. It does. Outside, the canyon was doing what it does at evening, which is go through its gradations of amber and red, and the nameless dark with the indifference of something very old toward the concerns of things that have only recently arrived. The river below the shelf was running clean and unhurried, back to its normal register now that the flood had found its level. I want to show you the basin survey map properly, I said. The full version, not the condensed overview I pulled up the other evening. The Team 3 annotations on the secondary channels are the most useful part for agricultural assessment, but you need the upstream context to understand why they matter. She set down the mug. In the morning. In the morning. And the flood event logs. I want to begin a formal analysis. We can start with the seasonally stratified data. The years where the upstream snowmelt ran early create a distinct pattern in the lower basin flood timing. If you can correlate that with the planting calendar data from the agricultural record. The Velorveth Agricultural Coordination Office has 10 years of planting calendar data from the lower outer margin zones, she said. I can access it through the administrative relay. She looked at the viewport. The canyon wall was in its final amber now, holding the last of the light before it went. This is something that could actually be done. Yes, I said, it is. She was quiet for a moment, watching the amber go. Then she said, my agricultural logistics posting in this sector runs through the end of the season. I can extend it. The lower basin assessment work is genuine. The farming zones have real structural needs that have been underdocumented for years. An extended posting would be justified on those grounds alone. And the other grounds? She looked at me, not with the careful assessment quality she had used in the first days, but with something plainer and more settled. I found 7 people's worth of rescue events in your SAR logs, she said. 15 years of flood events, all documented, none of them ever used for what they could be used for. She turned back to the viewport, and I found the man who was doing the work. I would like to stay long enough to understand what that means. The canyon wall went from amber to the deep red it holds for the last few minutes of direct light. I have been watching it do this for 7 years, and I still look every time. There is something about the way the color changes in basalt, not a smooth gradient but a series of shifts, each one distinct, like the rock is moving through a series of decisions rather than a single process. The shoulder, I said. The rotation medic comes through in 4 days. I want them to image it and confirm the reduction was clean. I know. She rolled the slung arm gently, testing range. It feels correct. You said it correctly. 2-count method. Standard for this type. You warned me before the count. Most people advise against that. They say the patient tenses if they know it's coming. They do, she said, but it is still better to know. Yes, I said. Most rescuers don't bother. I thought about this. Seems like the kind of thing that matters, I said. The canyon wall finished its red and went to its nameless dark color. Not quite black, not quite gray. The specific tone of basalt in zero direct light that has no standard word because most people who would need a word for it are not generally paying attention to basalt at this hour. Above the gorge rim, the sky was showing the first of the outer margin stars, which in a canyon you only see as a narrow band, but which on a clear night at this altitude are sharp enough to navigate by. Keithra held the mug in both hands and watched the dark canyon wall and the stars and the river somewhere below, and I held mine and did the same. The Sovereignty carrier was long gone. I had heard it lift about 20 minutes before. The depot was quiet in the way canyon depots are quiet at night, which is not silent, the river, the wind at the rim, the cooling metal of the basalt giving up its heat, but which is a particular quality of quiet that is different from the absence of sound. It is the sound of something very large not paying attention to you specifically, which is its own kind of company. I should tell you something about the law, Keithra said, not looking away from the viewport. All right. The acceptance clause is what I invoked, but the original statute, the bond statute before the acceptance clause, was added in the 3rd revision. It was written specifically for Canyon Country. She turned to look at me. The original writers had noted that the people who did the retrieving in canyon flood conditions were a specific type. They were not people who were in the canyon because they wanted something from it. They were people who were in the canyon because the canyon was where they worked, and the work included going in when someone needed pulling out. She paused. The law was written to protect those people from being left with nothing after doing that work. But the third revision understood something the original drafters had noted in their margin annotations, that sometimes the bond the law captured was one both parties would have chosen if the law hadn't done it first. The acceptance clause is for those cases. I looked at her. I read the margin annotations, she said, of the original statutory drafting committee. Yes. When? On the first day, when I was in the back room and you were on the dock. I had access to the Sovereign Legal Archive through the administrative relay. She looked at the mug. I wanted to understand what kind of law had done this. I thought about what kind of person, 24 hours out of a canyon flood with a dislocated shoulder, spends their recovery time reading the margin annotations of a 400-year-old statute. What did you find? I said. I found that the original writers were canyon people themselves, she said. They wrote in the margin of the third draft, "We are not writing a law for the rescuer who wants to benefit from the rescue. We are writing a law for the rescuer who has gone in because there was someone in the water, and they are the kind of person the law should be protecting. The bond will find the right people, and we trust it to know them." The canyon was very quiet around us. Then the law knew what it was doing, I said. Yes, she said, I believe it did. We sat for a while longer, with the canyon going on in its patient, indifferent way around us, which is also the way that very old things have of simply continuing to exist, while the arrangements that happen inside them run their course. Below us, the river ran at its normal level, clear and steady now that the flood had finished its argument with the geography and found its resolution. The south face basalt fin that breaks the current in flood conditions was somewhere in the dark below, holding its position the way it has held it for longer than any statute. In the morning, Keithra said. The map. In the morning, I said. And the flood event logs. We'll start with the seasonally stratified years, 5 years of early snowmelt on record. The pattern in the Third Bend Basin is consistent enough that you could derive a probability model with the right methodology. I have the methodology, she said. We used something similar for the Vel-Kareth upper margin assessment 3 years ago. Different geography, but the statistical framework would transfer. Show me in the morning, I said. She turned to look at me, and something that had been working toward being a smile arrived there. You want to see the methodology? I want to see if it works in canyon conditions. There are variables that don't appear in the upper margin zone data. Then we'll test it together, she said. She set down the mug when it was empty and did not immediately move. I did not either. The canyon went on doing what it does, which is exist in its ancient, patient way, full of the particular kind of indifference that is not hostile but simply other, the indifference of something that has been here for millions of years and will be here for millions more, and in that context finds most of the things people get exercised about to be of moderate significance at most. I have found this quality of the canyon useful for most of my adult life. It puts things in a frame that helps. The rope hardware error was still in the system. The system maintenance cycle was still 4 months out. The handwritten log on its hook had its own column for it, as it had for the last 11 days, accurate and current. In the morning we fixed it. Not through the system. The system would take its 4 months. We fixed it the way you fix things in canyon country when the official mechanism is unavailable, which is to document it thoroughly in the manual log with the date and method of correction, and to update the handwritten record, and to note it in the supply transfer manifest so that the next rotation would catch any downstream effects. Keithra did the documentation. She had neat, precise handwriting, the administrative training, probably, of someone who had been writing formal records since childhood. She wrote both our names in the correction notation, not just the depot operators, both of us. I looked at that for a moment. Protocol, she said, not looking up from the log. If two people are running a depot, both names go in the correction record. We're not officially both running the depot. She looked up. The teal eyes had the canyon pool quality in the morning light, clear all the way to whatever the bottom is. The acceptance clause provisions, she said. You read them. I had. Among other things, they specified that a bonded pair operating in an outer margin setting were to be treated as a joint operational unit under Sovereignty Administrative Code, with equal authority in each other's domains. That applies to agricultural logistics assessments, I said. It applies to outer margin operations, which includes agricultural logistics assessment and resupply depot operations. A pause. I looked up the relevant precedent. There was a case in the 2nd century where a bonded pair were operating a survey station, and a mining consortium tried to claim the depot operation fell under a different administrative category. The court found for the bonded pair. You read the precedent cases, I said. I read everything relevant, she said. I am very thorough. I looked at the log with both our names in it. Then I went and got us both mugs of tea, because the morning was cold the way canyon mornings are cold, and the heating coil needed time. When I came back, she had moved to the wall display and was already looking at the basin survey map. The morning light through the east viewport was the sharp early canyon light that only lasts about 20 minutes before it softens, and it was catching the gold ivory of her skin and the dark wine red of her hair in a way that the emergency lamp on the first night had not. Start with the Third Bend tributary, I said, setting the tea beside her. The seasonal variation there is the most pronounced. She picked up the tea without looking away from the map. I see 3 annotation clusters in the lower section. Survey Team 3. Teams 3 and 4 both work that zone. The annotations in blue are 3s, red are 4s. They don't always agree on the seasonal timing, which is why the full data set matters. Disagreement is useful, she said. It tells you where the uncertainty is real. Yes, I said, it does. The canyon outside was doing its morning thing, the light coming down from the rim in the way it does, illuminating things from above and changing what they look like by the angle. The river ran clear below the shelf. Somewhere up canyon, the survey teams were probably already moving toward their morning sites. This is the work, it continues. The analysis eventually produced a predictive model for Third Bend Basin flood timing, with a precision that the Agricultural Coordination Office said was the best they had seen for that zone in 40 years of outer margin operation. The farming infrastructure proposal that used it as its foundation moved through the sovereignty review process in 14 months, which is fast for a sovereignty administrative review, and the lower basin agricultural capacity in that sector increased by 31% over the following 3 years. But that is not the part of the story I am telling. The part I am telling is this: the canyon morning, the tea, the map, the 2 names in the correction log. I have pulled 7 people out of that south ledge over 22 years. Every one of them was someone who needed pulling. None of them were the same as this. The law knew what it was doing. I have come to agree with the original drafters on that point, and I have read their margin annotations now too, and I find that the specific phrasing, "the law will find the right people and we trust it to know them," is one of the more accurate things I have read in 43 years of reading things. The rope hardware error was fixed in the morning. Everything else took longer and went deeper and turned out to be the kind of work you do not finish, which is the best kind.